that, we're going to just jump right into the very first essential, which is to engage in effective planning. Because, as you've heard it said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So what are we talking about with regard to planning and being proactive versus reactive?
One of the myths I've seen with people saying, well, if I react really quickly, I'm being proactive. They're really different things. Reacting is letting the stimulus of the world around you control your day and what you're going to do and whether you get your work done. And proactive is a discipline of taking time on a regular basis, and we'll talk about some of those techniques, to seize control of your day. Now, when I first started trying to do this as a lawyer practicing, I took it a little bit to the extreme, and I tried to plan every single element of my day, which lasted for about 5 minutes, and then that was over. What I learned was being more realistic about planning and putting in blocks of time when I knew I had to be productive on that thing, instead of waiting and trying to hope a block showed up. And that was an example of being more proactive, knowing that if I chunked up my time, I could get to a destination, than reacting to the day around me.
And the notion that if you remember, there's this wall coming at you of work. So the extent to which you own pushing back and starting to say, I'm going to decide where I'm going to go out of these 100 things that I could do, versus letting circumstances dictate what I do. One of our favorite quotes, again from David Maister, is, what you do with your billable time determines your revenue, and what you do with your non-billable time determines your future. So your ability to work on your practice in addition to just in your practice is essential.
And if your personal situation is you're an associate in a firm and other people are controlling your workday and they're bringing matters into you, you still can and should be focused on your non-billable time. One of the things to think about from a time management perspective is, even those of you who are in very large firms, you are your own brand, and you do have to work on your own individual practice to increase your own value to the firm and to be able to achieve your goal, whether that's partner or whatever that goal might be. So think about your non-billable time, not just what the firm tells you to do for non-billable time, whether it's administrative or timesheets or pro bono activities, but make yourself one of those matters.
So what are the planning horizons when we speak of the idea of consciously planning more so than you've probably done in the past? Well, there's annual planning, of course. We're going to focus, there's quarterly planning, 90-day goals. There's weekly planning, which gets down to the more granular level, the more practical level we'll talk about. We're going to focus on daily planning in this session. Day to day, starting the day so that you're not just coming in to work on whatever was on top of the pile the night before. There's almost this seamless river that's flowing, and lawyers walk in typically and begin working immediately on whatever they were thinking of last night, either when they left the office or in the middle of the night, or on their way into work.
Or even worse, they wake up in the morning and you check your iPhone, your BlackBerry, your iPad, your computer to see what email came in last night, and then you begin working on that to just get through that before you get to your matters.
Right. So what we're suggesting is you stop before you start your day, and you can do this at night, but we find most attorneys prefer to do this in the morning. And whether it's 10 minutes or however detailed you take what we're going to share with you, the key thing is stop, don't do production. Compartmentalize out some time to say, how will I make this day go? And make that an explicit inquiry within yourself.
And you need to understand what your weekly and weekly priorities are, especially for managing your caseload, so that you don't get so focused on the day that you miss what's coming next week. But you need to use those weekly priorities to plan your daily work.
And you need to block in time for each of these activities. So annually, quarterly, that's going out and just putting in a Saturday morning. It could be a weekend where you're saying, I'm looking at what are my 90-day goals? What are my annual goals for next year with regard to perhaps, you're going to have some examples.
We're making the assumption as we go through the program that you've been through yourself an effective annual process. You know what your goals are, both professionally and for your firm, and that you've broken that down into quarterly and even monthly goals. That process itself, we could spend a couple hours on that process. But if you haven't done that, you need to be doing the annual and quarterly on your own, just to know
Where you're going.
What are you doing? Or you're just left victim to the circumstances around you. And one of the things that I haven't met a lawyer who isn't really interested in controlling his or her own destiny. So if you do this, you're controlling your destiny, and then down to the day. None of us want somebody else to decide whether our career is going to be successful.
And this last bullet about actually blocking in time in your calendar, we really mean it. We mean actually entering it as an event that you would treat as sacrosanct, that would not just get bumped because, a prospective client calls or something else comes up. If you don't write it down, how will you remember to regularly address it?
Yeah, make it a must. Put it in your calendar so
Right.
whoever has access to your calendar can see that.
Right. So daily planning specifically, there's a handout that we can call your attention to, but here's the drill on effective daily planning. And truly, this is the single most influential new routine or practice that we see has the greatest effect on attorneys in terms of increased productivity, increased revenue as a result of that. So start your planning first thing in the morning, and we recommend actually putting in 30 minutes into your calendar as a recurring event that is conscious, do not disturb time, where you're not multitasking. All you're focusing on is this sequence of activities. So you start in the morning, review your calendar. What is coming up? How much white space do you have? And by white space, we mean, as of that morning, unscheduled time where you do not have a firm commitment in place on the calendar. It's yours to decide what goes in there in that white space. Some of you have, on a regular basis, quite a bit of white space. Each day, it's fluid.
Well, you have to resist the temptation to fill it up. Because on the one hand, you're going to have this list of things you need to do, and then you're going to be tempted to put everything into the calendar. And we know that that's not how the day works. So there's filling up your white space to put blocks of time in, but there's also not overfilling it so you get behind.
And actually, we're speaking right to that, which is around reviewing your to-dos. So we're presuming, and this is one of the 8 elements, is that you have an effective to-do list. So you start the day, you're not doing emails, you're looking at your white space, you're looking at what are the things that I have to do, and we'll talk again a little bit later about how to create effective to-do lists. So you're reviewing what's on the plate, and then you're selecting 2 or 3 key things to do, to Doug's point, so that you're not unrealistically saying, I'm going to get to these 5 things. So how do you help make more efficient decisions as you're reviewing your to-do list? Well, once you've decided your 2 or 3 focus activities for the day, it's really important to estimate how much time you're going to be spending on each one of those. If you just say, the Jones contract, well, that could be 40 more hours of work. You've got 3 hours that are unaccounted for, unplanned, as of the start of the day. What chunk of that will you do? Is it maybe just assembling a table of contents? Is it meeting for a half an hour with your associate to do that table of contents? What is it that you're going to do, and will it really take 30 minutes? What's the next chunk? So the key thing here is estimating your time accurately for what you want to get done in a certain amount of time, realistically.
Yeah, contract review is a great example. When you send out a draft of a contract and you get it back from someone and you need to review what their comments were, it's interesting. When I was doing that, you'd go through it, and the first phase is to go through and you're marking it up and rejecting it and saying awful things about the other guy or person on the other side about how could they want that, I'm never going to agree to that. But what you're doing is identifying what the issues are. So that process itself doesn't take very long. But even if that was just a half an hour to go through it and identify the top issues, that allows you to then create the next set of planning steps that you would use. So don't be intimidated by things that you believe are going to take a lot of time. Break them up into their component parts.
And when we speak about prioritizing and calendaring in time, we're going to go into detail around what are the criteria to help you think through what is the next chunk of observable action, but we'll get there. The 7th step here is actually then decide to put into your calendar however you're using your calendar, Outlook, but don't just say, all right, I'm going to do that at 1 o'clock. Make an appointment with yourself as though it were an appointment with your most important client, or if it was a meeting that was critical to your future development. Because really, this approach is critical to your future professional growth, your professional success. So it's taking it from your head, like, oh, I think I'll work on these 3 things, to I'm going to work on these aspects of these 3 things, and given the amount of white space I have available today, I'm going to aim to do this much on each of them, and I'm going to put them in as events in my calendar. And then, of course, the end of your 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes of morning planning, you can adjust as needed. Because, to Doug's point, there will have been emails that came in the middle of the night, say, oh, actually, I wanted to get to these, but this truly is critical. It rises to the threshold that's going to be willing to, that causes me to adjust, so I'm going to review it. Does this make sense for the day, given what I know? Yes, that process, first thing in the morning, is the starting place to begin leaning into and influencing your day.
When you do these things, you wind up taking control of your calendar instead of your calendar controlling you. So when you plan in the morning and you go through that activity, you come back from lunch just to take 5 minutes to say, how am I doing against the calendar? What do I need to adjust? What happened this morning that blew up the calendar? But when you've done the planning in the morning, a very quick check to say, I'm off track. And that's the first important thing, is to recognize and be able to admit to yourself when you're off track. Because none of us like to say, well, I can work twice as fast in the afternoon and finish everything by the end of the day.
Although we say that all the time.
We say that all the time. But if you've done the planning process in the beginning, your time estimate to get those afternoon tasks done didn't get smaller because you have less time. You may need to adjust your expectations. But this is a proactive, conscious management of your calendar as opposed to trying to catch up to the calendar.
And as part of morning planning, we recommend meeting with your assistant, daily regular meetings. That can be in the morning. It can be throughout the day. It can be later in the day. And again, depending on your practice area, litigators, trust and estates folks, very different sort of daily flow and energy through the day. So what do you talk about? Well, review your calendar with your assistant. Make sure that you're communicating about what's on the plate from his or her point of view. What are the particular actions on files that are coming up that your assistant needs to make sure that you're touching? Did you communicate that? Did you add that into your morning planning? Because maybe they're going to bring something that you say, oh, that's right. That was not among my top priorities. Thank you for reminding me. The key concept in general here is relying on someone who can be, sometimes we call it a traffic cop, who can help you manage you. And when you have a strong assistant, that's really key. So investing in your assistant, which we'll talk about around delegation,
and
is
another
important.
As your assistant is to help you as a whole lawyer. And one of the things to be mindful of is really to share these techniques with your assistant and to be conscious of how that assistant is managing their time. One of the things that I used to be famous for was whenever it popped into my head that it was important to me, I'd jump out and I'd go to my assistant, I'd give them the new task. It wasn't until I started applying these disciplines and I actually had the conversation about how she managed time to realize that was massively interrupting her time.
Sure.
So getting into that rhythm can really make you much more productive, and it can avoid this reaction that some of you might get when you walk up to your assistant and they get all tense and they wonder what's coming next. A regular routine of communication can really help with that.